Aloha and welcome to Ehana Kako. We're here every week on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. I'm Keli'i Akina, president of the Grassroots Institute, and we're at a place now where lots of wonderful conversations happen. Today, my guest, Scott Wilson, is the president of the American Institute of Architects here in Hawaii, and there are about 800 architects who are a member of that chapter. Not only do they design the beautiful buildings that we see in the houses and the renovations and so forth, they also do a lot of thinking. Architects actually started as philosophers. They started as people who began to think about the spaces in which we live, inside and outside. And today we're going to talk about a very interesting subject, public spaces. Take a look at all of the buildings that are coming up in Kaka'ako and elsewhere here in the islands. Take a look at some of the old classical places and our neighborhoods and so forth. Well, they're all held together by public spaces, spaces in which to walk and drive and recreate and just simply to maybe sunbathe and so forth. Do we have some challenges facing our public spaces now? In some ways, they may be the final frontier. Please welcome with me today, Scott Wilson. Scott, so glad you're here.
Hello, Keli'i. Thank you. Thanks for inviting me.
Well, lucky we live Hawaii.
Absolutely. It's still, you talk about public spaces, and where else do you have the fantastic weather and the blue sky?
Absolutely.
And the interaction that we have.
And that all comes together in our public spaces. I know that one of the things we do at the Grassroots Institute as a think tank is look at all of the lists where Hawaii stands in terms of our taxation, our regulation, our economy, and the cost of living. And we're really up there in terms of housing and so forth. But I wanted to start simply by saying that this is a lucky place. It's lucky for us to be here. And I ask you this question: why do you pay the price of paradise?
I still enjoy the island mentality. You know, we always laugh about how Honolulu is really still a small town at heart. And I think part of it is we are on an island and we all treasure each other. We know that we're going to see each other at some point again, because we're all in this one little boat together.
That's right.
And I think that gives a real preciousness to our interactions. We take the time to slow down and enjoy each other, and there's plenty to amuse each other with, because we all have different customs and different outlooks. But,
absolutely.
I think that's what keeps me here.
Yeah, and we need to be together in our lives, in our working, in our relationships, largely because there's nowhere else to go.
We are an ecosystem, in effect.
That's
we're
right.
A social and cultural ecosystem.
And we're surrounded 360 degrees by water, and there's not a lot of space.
Not really.
We're going to talk a little bit about public spaces, but let me ask you about what percentage of our islands is devoted to urban development?
It's really a lot smaller than you might think. I mean, on Oahu, sometimes we think, oh my gosh, are we going to pave our entire island? Really, it's not that way. I mean, it's probably, less than 10% of the island.
On our island.
If you take the whole state as a whole, it's a much lower percentage, probably 2%.
And that's incredible when we think about it. But when we realize that we're a volcanic island state. So we have these peaks and mountains in the middle, and then this very narrow band of around the mountains near the shore in which we can develop.
Yeah, I mean, that's how Honolulu has become really a linear city because of geography. We're squashed between the mountains and the ocean. We've kind of built all along the south shore of Oahu, but it's really a fairly small amount. And I think actually that's to the good, because I think smart growth philosophy says that you should try to keep your cities compact, because then you're spending less on infrastructure and mobility.
Now, there's a narrow view of architecture that thinks only about the structure, the building, the house, the high-rise and so forth. But really, everything around the structure and within the structure that's accessible to the owners and the public is part of the architect's point of view.
Well, the urban design aspect, yeah. I mean, in any architecture school, by your third or fourth year, you are doing studios on urban design, because they're trying to stress the context of the building. It isn't just this one sculptural form that you're doing. you're actually creating space all around the building, and you should be aware of that context.
How would you define public space?
Well, public space is, and that's a good question, because the public tends to think about parks and beaches, and those are public spaces, absolutely, and they're important. But for me, the really important public spaces are our streets, our right-of-ways, our sidewalks. Think of what, in a small town, when you talk about public space, yes, there might be a town square, but more importantly, in terms of social interaction, it's Main Street. It's Main Street. And what is Main Street? But it is a street and sidewalks and those frontages of stores.
Well, here in downtown Honolulu, from where we're broadcasting, there can be no more Main Street than Bishop Street, which goes north,
King
south,
Street,
and King Street.
Yeah.
And behind us, on our green screen, we're showing a picture of Tamarind Park.
Tamarind Park is actually private space. It is a public park, and it appears to be public space, but actually it is privately owned. It's a wonderful addition to our downtown. I give all credit to the owners for having developed it.
But wouldn't you say that in the broader sense, it's a public space, although it's privately owned? And there's a whole category of public spaces that are under private ownership, like Wanalua Park, for example. I know you have some feelings about Tamarind Park.
Well, I not particularly Tamarind Park, but when people hold it up as an example of public space, I like to temper that, because it is, if you're having a true public discourse, if you're having a demonstration or a march, you will not be allowed to go into Tamarind Park.
Because you've got the security guards there.
There are private security guards. It's the same thing with Ala Moana Center. Again, a wonderful space, everybody interacts there, but it is a private space, and true, a complete mix of all of our citizens are not allowed there.
Now what I'm picking up is that in that definition of public space, we have more than just space. We have more than just access to the public.
Yeah.
There are certain functions that you're mentioning.
Yeah, free speech.
Free speech.
Yeah, free speech is normally an inherent right on any public space, and it is not, you will not see that in Tamarind Park or Ala Moana Center, or as you said, Moanalua Park. Those are wonderful spaces, but they are privately owned, and you don't have a right to free speech.
So a true public space reflects our principles of democracy in our country. There are places that anyone can go to and say anything that they want to say and so forth. And that actually narrows down, doesn't it, quite a bit, the existence of public space.
That's true. That's why I really stress the importance of having good streets, good walking streets in the city, because that's where I feel the most citizen interaction will occur. And if you want to have a democracy, you have to have citizen interaction, and you have to be aware. We can't all be in gated communities or in our high-rise condo. We're going to become oblivious to big hunks of our own society if we live that way.
Where are some of the public spaces here in Hawaii that are functioning well as public spaces, as places where anyone can go, where you can have any conversation, where you really can reflect the principles of democracy?
Well, as I said, for me, of course, beaches and parks are wonderful. Ala Moana Beach Park, any of our beaches. Obviously, though, we don't all go to the beach on a given day. So I like to concentrate on the streets of Chinatown, the streets of downtown, the streets of Waikiki. Now, Waikiki, some locals will object and say, well, that's a tourist ghetto. But actually, there's 30,000 people living there year-round. So I think those are examples of good functioning public space. Others would be the pre-war neighborhoods of Honolulu, whether it's Liliha or it's Kapahulu or it's Manoa or it's Kaimaki. Those old neighborhoods where they built the storefronts right to the street, and people still go there on a daily basis and do their shopping and do their banking and so forth. They see their neighbors. Those are good functioning public spaces.
Now, going back to Waikiki, There are a lot of misconceptions about Waikiki for many people who prefer not to go into Waikiki.
Yeah.
And the number one misconception, I think, is that there's no parking in Waikiki, which is not all that far off, but there's parking if you want to get there. One of the things that strikes me now that you talk about what constitutes a public space is the fact that really there is diversity in Waikiki. If you go to the beach, you've got tourists, but the beaches aren't owned by the hotels. You've got people from all walks of life. You've got locals, you've got visitors. And when I'm down there at night, walking down Kalakaua or Kuhio, there's street vendors and there are preachers.
Buskers, yeah. There's Hare Krishna,
that's right.
There's, artists.
Yeah, you're dating yourself by saying Hare Krishna.
Oh, well, there's street musicians, there's actors, there's, performance artists and so forth. And there's, there's kids of all ages, there are people from all over the world, but those are true public spaces, and they're beautifully done. I give Mayor Jeremy Harris complete credit for investing in the public spaces of Waikiki in a really positive way. He did a tremendous job when he was in office.
Now, public spaces come to life at certain times, such as First Friday in downtown Honolulu, in the Chinatown area, with the art museums.
I think the 20-something generation loves Chinatown and Hotel Street, that corridor, because it is a vibrant public space. You see all the good, bad, and ugly on in Chinatown, and that brings a vitality. It's not a money-based street scene. It's about just enjoying an urban street.
So how do you assess the quality and quantity of our public spaces here in Hawaii, or particularly on Oahu?
Yeah, no, that's a very good point, because what I mentioned recently at a forum is that since World War II, we've had this degeneration of our street life in Honolulu. We've become a suburb. Unfortunately, that rush to suburbs that occurred all over America after World War II, it really took a hit, or it took a huge toll on our existing cities, because there was a rush to the suburbs. There was an ignoring of the downtown areas, and we lost people, we lost investment, and most destructively, our building codes were changed to reflect suburbs rather than cities. And so when new buildings came up in our central city, they were surrounded with parking lots as though they were in a suburb. And so we lost a lot of that beautiful streetscape that we had before the war. And it became hollowed out, and then people stopped walking in downtown Honolulu, or in Honolulu as a whole.
Does the proliferation of suburbism,
if that is suburbanization,
account for the dearth of activity most evenings in Honolulu, in the streets?
Well, downtown, as we've always lamented, that downtown becomes a ghost town on the weekends and after about 6 o'clock.
And we've had a hard time reversing that, even with Aloha Tower and other projects.
It is. It's 50 years of rush to the suburbs. Obviously, all the people who work downtown, they all bought homes in the valleys and the suburbs, and so very few. There was very few housing units left in downtown.
So you praised the earlier attempts in the 20th century to do urban planning in Hawaii, but you've seen a waning of that.
And now we've gone full circle. The good thing is that, and if we can get around to Kaka'ako.
Yes.
Kaka'ako is basically a current version of the old style of city planning, where we put mixed-use buildings together. We tried to design and push buildings right to the street edge so that there was a more interesting walking environment. And that's called a form-based building code. That is really, I think, going to be the salvation of our cities.
Well, this is very exciting, but in the process, there's been so much controversy. Do you think that people have not realized how revolutionary and how necessary this new kind of thinking about urban planning is?
Yeah. No, it's change, frankly. I think the people who are really threatened are really the people in their 40s, 50s, 60s, and so forth, because it's a radical change from 50 years of Hawaii. Since statehood, we've been having this rush to the suburbs. That's become the sort of the dream. The American dream in Honolulu has been to have a cute little house and a cute little yard, and to get that, you've had to move first to Mililani or Pearl City.
Right.
Then you've had to move further and further afield. Now it's Makakilo and it's Eva Beach and it's Kapolei. But we're going to run out of space.
Well, we'll come back in just a moment and talk
Okay.
a little bit more about how we're developing our spaces in a more intelligent way here in Honolulu and throughout the islands.
Okay.
I'm Keli'i Akina with my guest, Scott Wilson. We're talking about public spaces. We'll be right back on ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network after this message. Don't go away.
Hi, aloha. My name is Chris Leatham, and I host a show called The Economy and You. The show plays every Wednesday at noon, and on my show, I bring on guests who are interested or working in the technology space. And so I'd like you to come and watch the show and learn with me about all the sort of exciting things that we're doing in Hawaii to build and grow our economy ecosystem. So I'd like to say aloha, and I look forward to seeing you on the show. Thank you.
Aloha, my name is Paul Jackson, better known as PJ, and my local interest is in sports. I have my own sports radio show at KWAI AM 1080 that you can stream live. I also have my own website, pjsportsradio.com. We have live guests in studio, and we talk about discussions and topics that everyone wants to know locally here on the islands. We cover everything from surfing to basketball to whatever's going on locally, sports-wise. We try to do our best and cover the topics in depth as much as we can. Once again, thank you for joining PJ here on Hawaii Sports Update. Mahalo.
All right. Welcome back to ThinkTech Hawaii's Ehana Kako weekly program. We're here broadcasting from downtown Honolulu every week, and I want to say that the people who work at ThinkTech Hawaii are some of the best, brightest people around. They're keeping a conversation going. Jay Fidel and the crew are producing about 30 to 35 hours of original content from our studio. Come visit us sometime in the Pioneer Plaza and take a look at what goes out across the world. Today my guest is Scott Wilson, president of the American Institute of Architects, and we're talking about a topic that sometimes just passes us by because we enjoy it, but when we don't have it, we are more tense, we're less engaged with other people, the world seems a lot more difficult, and that is public spaces, the space in which we breathe and recreate and develop our relationships with the land and with the sky and the buildings. Scott, this is a fascinating topic. How do you think we're doing now as we move into some well-intentioned projects such as Kaka'ako?
Well, you bring up a good point about public space, because there are, you and I were talking about streets and sidewalks and the democratic side of public space. And when you talk about Kaka'ako, for example, a number of citizen groups have been clamoring for more open space, more green space, and that's public space, and that's definitely an important ingredient. Just places to run around and enjoy some open space. When you're living in a 21-story condominium, you need to be able to get out and just lay out on some grass and enjoy fresh air, the trade winds and the ocean, the sunshine.
Right. And the open space in Kaka'ako is not just a quote-unquote value added from developers. There has been a democratic process for the last decade that has really taken the vanguard to say, we don't want development here on the Ocean Makai side and so forth. You're familiar with this.
Yeah, and that's the kind of the strange twist with Kaka'ako is that almost all of the open space, the green space, the recreation space is on the ocean side of Ala Moana Boulevard, which is a kind of a problem, because if you're you're a family with young kids and you want to just come out and recreate for a while, how do you get there? If you're living in Kaka'ako, that's great, but you're going to have to make that trek down the street and then over Ala Moana Boulevard, and then just to get to some open space.
But nonetheless, it's there within walking
It
distance.
is there, and in terms, there's a very set kind of proportion and a kind of a ratio of people to open space, and they talk about 2 acres for every 1,000 people. And so I believe that overall within Kakako there is adequate open space. It seems crowded in the Mackay and the Mauka section because all of the towers tend to be there and all of the open space is on the Mackay side.
Now, even on the Mauka or mountain side, although we have nearby Ala Moana Park, sort of the central park,
Yeah.
but isn't there planning being done to give more breathing space in the Mauka section where the buildings are?
Well, there is one very nice park, Mother Waldron Park, and it's been recently refurbished and it's gorgeous. And that, I would say for the residents around that park, there is very good open space. But at this point, there are no plans to create more of those parks, which is a shame, I think, because a little central park like that, it has only so much mileage, and then there's too much
Certainly.
Yeah, buildings around.
Well, the development of buildings, the development of open space, the meeting of needs takes place in the midst of great transition. And so it's somewhat ironic, it's also very tragic that if you were to walk around or drive around much of the Kaka'ako area, especially down by the waterfront park and so forth, you'll see an emerging tent city of homeless people. So how do we balance this need for housing for those who don't have housing with the development of housing for the middle class and the working class?
Yeah, well, it's been a really big topic lately, this affordable housing, if we use that general term. The mayor has addressed it. He's trying to create a new office of affordable housing, and I applaud that. I think getting back to our earlier segment about just we all are living on an island and we all need to take care of each other. And I think this problem of homelessness is very real. It's extremely expensive to live here, and I think as a society we need to make an effort to find more affordable housing solutions for the less fortunate in our society. It's not just a case of welfare, it's a case of just a human tragedies.
That's right.
A lot of times there are just a series of events that befall, and a lot of these are families with young kids, and they're just living in a tent, and they end up in Kaka'ako because it's actually a very convenient area to access the social services that are available, but they don't have housing.
Right, and another reason they're there is that a good deal of the land is not yet fully developed, and so you've got them living right outside of construction sites and so forth.
They are on public space.
Yes.
Frankly, that's one reason why they can live there, is that those are public spaces, and we have a right to occupy those spaces.
But that public space for them is going to be disappearing very, very quickly. And what do you, what happens then to people? And I'm not asking you this so much as just thinking about it for a moment. What happens to people who are living in these public spaces when it comes time to build the buildings and they have to be kicked off?
There's this constant sort of shifting and rebalancing of our homeless. When laws get passed and they're not allowed to be in Waikiki, they have to move into Makiki or Kaka'ako, and then the city council passes a new sit-lie law that says, oh, you're not allowed to stay in Kaka'ako. They have to move on to Kapalama.
Right.
And now Kapalama is going to become off limits, so they're going to be pushed, who knows where, Mapunapuna or, somewhere else. I think that's a very short-sighted political solution, and I applaud the mayor for really taking it on more.
How do you think we're doing in terms of our provisions for affordable housing? I know that developers have to have affordable housing credits if they're going to gain the right to build in certain areas. Do you think we have enough of that, or do you think that the regulatory process is working for it?
Well, if you're going to simply create affordable housing through development, it's always going to be somewhat limited.
Right.
You can't squeeze the developers for the entire supply that we need. And I think they're doing a good job in creating sort of 100% median income housing, condominiums that cost in the $300,000 to $400,000 range. That's obviously not affordable for a lot of people. I think there has to be, in addition to the using development, I think the city has to step in and do some subsidized housing. Because frankly, given the high cost of construction, if we don't do some subsidized construction, we will not be addressing the homeless situation. The homeless are not about to buy those affordable units that are coming up in Kakaako.
Right.
Yeah.
We're talking about middle class struggling to afford even the affordable homes.
Just as I said, the sort
are
of median
available
income
there.
types, the people who are making 50,000 to 80,000, that's considered median income. We need to definitely create housing for them, and that can be done in Kakaako in the Mauka sections. Whereas, what do we do with homeless? That's definitely more of a Weinberg Foundation type housing where construction is subsidized and very low rents are offered for those families.
Now, you've spoken about the value of public space for mental health, for physical health,
And for democracy.
as well, and so forth. What do you think we need to be doing here in Hawaii, particularly in Honolulu, where we have the greatest urbanization? What do you think we need to be doing in order to increase our availability of public space as we move forward?
Well, as I said, we do have some great working public spaces. I talked about Chinatown, downtown, and Waikiki.
So in some cases, it's not so much that we would go out and create it, but we would revitalize existing places like Chinatown.
Yeah, well, those are pretty good right now. I would say, if you look at the streets of Chinatown, they're just bustling with people. People are taking the bus in. What I would like to see is to see more of our central city become like a Chinatown or a Waikiki. And the reason those work so well is because they have special design guidelines for those districts that have encouraged, storefronts to be built along the street, and they put the parking has been tucked away either underground or in the middle of the block.
Right. In fact, the panel you referred to a little bit earlier, sponsored by ThinkTech Hawaii, brought together several experts in the field, some architects and others. And some of the people on that panel were talking about the need for multiple activities to be available in order to make a public space work.
Yeah.
In fact, up to 10 of them. Can you remember what some of those were? I think transportation is one, food availability, shops,
entertainment, shopping, retail, service industries, residential industries, access, mobility.
And that's why there are some empty open spaces that just don't function and become nothing more than dumps or places of refuge for
just
for
a kind of a
homeless.
windswept wasteland. I mean, I think in Manhattan.
There you go.
The 6th Avenue. 6th Avenue was redeveloped in the 60s and 70s with this sort of urban planning zeal, and they put these enormous empty plazas in front of every one of those towers, and to this day, those are just empty, kind of windswept spaces that no one bothers to go to.
So to create places people go to or destinations, there need to be a good number of activities around them. And I think of places like Fisherman's Wharf in San Francisco. You've got everything from entertainment to food to you can buy anything you may or may not want there. And
I know. I mean, this is a democracy, and a democracy is messy. So yes, you will have a wide range of people. Maybe you'll have some vagrants, and you'll have some people that you think of as undesirable or not that you would talk to on a daily basis. But that's love it or not, that is American society.
And when you say love it or not in American society, I think in a sense some of us need to develop a taste for it, because if we are too compartmentalized, as you mentioned before, in terms of being in the suburbs and then going to work, we may want our lives segregated. There's room for that, but there has to be a
Well-
taste for vibrance.
Well, that's where, yeah, and when we talk about political gridlock in Washington, it's because we've gotten too many politicians who are intolerant of any other viewpoints, any other aspects of society.
There you go.
And that leads to gridlock, and that's a breakdown in democracy.
We're going to take a short break and come back for our final segment, talking with Scott Wilson of the American Institute of Architects about public spaces in Hawaii. Don't go away.
This is Alice Lee Hagan, host of ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. My show here at ThinkTech Hawaii is every Thursday from 3 to 4 in the afternoon. I bring in interesting guests from Hawaii, the mainland, and hopefully international guests in the future. Do join us on Thursday from 3 to 4 p.m. ThinkTech Hawaii Business Education Spotlight. Aloha.
Aloha, I'm Hunter Hevlin, host of Sustainable Hawaii here at ThinkTech Hawaii. You can tune in every week on Thursday at 2 p.m. to see interviews with sustainability professionals from around the state and even further abroad, learning about activities with water management, food security, waste management, and a whole host of other fascinating opportunities to get engaged with making a greener island. So if you're interested in making the transition from consuming individuals to communities of producers, check us out every Thursday.
Welcome back to Ehana Kako on the ThinkTech Hawaii Broadcast Network. Ehana Kako, that comes from a venerable old Hawaiian saying, E pule kako, let us pray together. Well, at the Grassroots Institute, we say, let's work together, because think of the alternative, not working together. And that doesn't work out well in an island state like Hawaii. If you have your computer handy or your mobile device, you may want to ask a question or weigh in with a comment for Scott or myself, and just send us a tweet at ThinkTech Hi, ThinkTech HI, and then we'll see it on the screen and we'll respond to it. But before we go, Scott, what are some places that you think are ideal either now or in the near future for providing this concept of public space?
Well, as I said, I like some of the old neighborhoods in Honolulu. I think, you know, in the old days, before we got into really complicated zoning, that is through the 1920s, 30s, 40s, the standard way to create a neighborhood was to just build storefronts right along the street, and everyone would walk into town and do their banking and their shopping and their so forth. So you still see those great little neighborhoods like in Kamiki, the top of the hill in Kamiki. You see it in Kapahulu. Unfortunately, Kapahulu has been kind of hollowed out over time, but you see it in Liliha or Manoa in pockets. You can still see those old village centers. But what, to me, is exciting about Kaka'ako is that they are intending to create those interesting streets again with a whole new, in a whole new vernacular of urban design, in which it's obviously a lot more high density. So I think a lot of locals are very apprehensive of Kaka'ako because they think, oh my gosh, it's a developer's giveaway, and it's destroying Hawaii. We're going to have this horrible density, and it's going to be Singapore. It's going to be Hong Kong. There's all kinds of horrible analogies out there.
But the reality, of course, is that urban development takes place in only a very small percentage of our land, and the growth of Kaka'ako actually doesn't change the profile at all, really.
It's true smart growth. It's smart growth. It's infill. It's urban infill.
That's right. We have these beautiful, vast areas of open land in the inland, and I suppose even if you live in Kaka'ako, you might want to drive across the Pali every now and then. But what it gives us is some more diversity, I think. Think of the developments that emerged in the 70s, like Mililani, where you'd go on mile after mile of bedroom space, and then a small area where there might be the community center or the shopping center. Kapolei is somewhat like that, with housing in Makakilo and Kapolei, and then you've got the town. If people like that, that's still there. And if they want to drive into town for their job, some people might actually prefer that. But Kaka'ako is a different way of living.
I think options, I think that's exactly right, is that we need to give the next generation a better sense of options of where to live.
Well,
'Cause,
you know, that
it can't just be Eva Beach, Kapolei.
Right.
Because that locks you into a 2-hour commute morning and night, and I think that's debilitating.
And that brings up another important issue, generations. Generations have different patterns. Do you think that millennials, those who are between the ages of 15 and 35, have different living styles that they would want from perhaps the baby boomers today?
It's huge. I can only speak personally. Obviously, I'm a baby boomer, but I have children in their 20s, and they didn't even want to learn how to drive a car. They wanted to live in the city. Their favorite places were Chinatown and Waikiki. They could walk those places at night. They could catch a ride and then just hang out and just kind of walk the streets. And I think there's a profound shift with the millennials. They love urban spaces. If you look at what's being done in Chinatown with these old brick buildings and these industrial interiors, that's an aesthetic now, and it's a lifestyle choice, and it's an aesthetic, and it all dovetails.
Sure. You know, frequently my wife and I will go to First Friday or Friday after dark at the Honolulu Art Museum.
Right.
And what I noticed more than anything else is my own age.
Yeah.
as 95% plus of the people I see fit within that millennial group.
Yeah.
And there's a tremendous joy, a tremendous energy, a tremendous interaction between people.
The networking is really intense. It is a very different lifestyle. They're linked, you know, via social media in a way that the baby boomers never used.
And this may very well drive the developments such as Kaka'ako. I don't know if you caught this figure recently. The latest survey shows that millennials have now become the #1 work group in America. About 34% of all people in the workplace are millennials. About 33% are now baby boomers.
Wow. There's the change.
So
the change is coming, and those numbers will continue to grow apart
That's
with
right.
time.
And that has a lot of bearing in terms of places that are set up for living as well as working or having just foot access or bicycle access to jobs.
I kind of worry that my house in Manoa is gonna lose its value over time, because all these millennials want to live in town. They don't care about suburban living. I just wonder what's going to happen with our real estate values, because the demand seems to be dropping.
Well, someone will be able to sell it to a Chinese.
Yeah, maybe these will all be taken over by overseas investors.
But there's another demographic that will affect Kaka'ako, and that is the rising elderly population. In fact, right now, without the massive development that we expect in the next 5 years, a significant percentage of the dwellers in Kaka'ako are individuals who are single and without families, and a good number of them are elderly. And
as long as they're active elderly, yeah. But I agree. To me, again, as you get older in life, your values change when you hit that particular phase where you're no longer interested in driving, and you're no longer in taking care of your yard or pets maybe, and you have no children. Kaka'ako living would be very attractive.
Now, Scott, I don't know if this was contrived because of the topic of our program or just naturally what you and I would be talking about, but in our discourse about public spaces, we haven't talked about the countryside. We haven't talked about driving out to Makaha. We haven't talked about the North Shore and so forth. And I'm wondering why something that is so obvious when it comes to public spaces has taken less attention. And this happened also in the panel discussion that ThinkTech recently sponsored. I don't think anybody talked about going to the North Shore as utilizing public space.
Well, again, my angle was public space is important for a democracy, and the heart of a democracy is social interaction. So obviously, we don't all, spend that much time on the North Shore, but it is obvious. It's a wonderful antidote urban life.
But that beautiful little town, Haleiwa, up there, is a microcosm of public space.
And look at Haleiwa. What is the important public space? There are no formal plazas or town squares or government buildings. What makes the public space nice is just basically the right of way of the main street.
And standing in line for shave ice.
Right.
And walking into a Wyland gallery.
Anybody can stand in line for shave ice, yeah. And you can speak your mind freely as well.
Yes, a lot of democracy takes place up
yeah.
at the North Shore.
No, it's true.
You know, there are some public spaces that are in contest today, such as the 30-meter telescope site up at Mauna Kea. What do you think is happening in terms of some of the politics of public spaces today?
No, public space cannot be co-opted by any particular member of the public. There seems to be a renegotiation going on up on Mauna Kea, and I just think that we need to keep in mind that previous negotiations for that space allowed for certain rules, and it was supposed to be inclusive. There were going to be sacred precincts, there were going to be scientific precincts. The public could go up there on tours and so forth. I thought it had a good balance, and I hope that we can continue that balance.
I would, to say the least, organizations like the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, the university, offices like the Office of the Governor are under a great deal of pressure to respond to different voices. And the voices are not just typically the development versus non-development. It seems as though there are many different voices that are coming forward. And maybe that's the nature of public space.
Well, it is. Public
competition.
space will be in contest, but I think we always keep in mind that it's the inclusivity of public space that is most important, that all segments of society are allowed to present and to congregate there. And I have no problem with Hawaiian activists who want to go up there and make their case, just as I have no problem with scientists wanting to go up there and also make their case. And I think that's good.
The working out of that battle is really the nature of public spaces.
Yeah.
You know, I want to give an apology to anyone from the neighbor islands who realizes that I've been very Oahu-centric in this conversation. We're sitting in downtown Honolulu right now. And any thoughts before we go? Have you had any thoughts about how public space works out throughout the state in our neighbor islands as well?
Yeah, it is. Public spaces on the neighbor islands, it tends to be a little more small town. And I think in a way, you have an inherent advantage in a small town because you always do get out of your car and in your little town, your little center of your town, you are walking around and you actually have a good interaction with all the members of your community. That's really the heart of public space, and they have it by design.
Well, the interaction, the community, all of these different elements that come together. So you consider yourself lucky to live Hawaii.
Every day I enjoy it, and I would never trade it for anywhere else.
Well, it's the best place to experience public space, I think, and I hope we can keep it that way and build it into an even better place.
Me too.
God, thank you. Thanks for what you do as an architect with a concern for how we interact as public and relate to all of the resources that go into our building and our urbanization.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much. My guest today has been Scott Wilson of the American Institute of Architects, talking about something that I have to say I don't talk about a lot, and I'm so glad to be able to engage with Scott in discussing our public spaces. I think we can do good here in our state by being aware of this, being aware of our public spaces, and advocating for policies that give us more of that public space and the excitement that takes place when we come together and enhance the Aina. Until next time on E Hana Kako, aloha.